So, that was a dud. Yesterday we made a video on this YouTube channel talking about how the Montreal Canadiens had a really big opportunity to help out not only themselves, but my Vancouver Canucks in the Western Conference in their game against the St. Louis Blues. Had the Blues lost against Montreal in regulation, Montreal would have improved their playoff odds significantly, and St. Louis's would have gone down by about 10%. It was a pretty vast spread. And I was making that video from the perspective of a Canadiens and a Canucks fan that was super eager to see both my teams make the Stanley Cup Playoffs, and ultimately, unfortunately, the Montreal Canadiens got smoked. Yeah, we're not gonna go into an entire game review. I don't think we need to go and highlight any part of the Canadiens losing 6-1 versus St. Louis. By the way, the Blues have won 7 games in a row. Kind of ridiculous for them. Ay, that wildcard race in the West is really tightening up there between Minnesota and St. Louis. No room for Calgary or Vancouver up in these parts, I guess. But yesterday's game was a wake-up call, and I wanted to refer to a few different sources on the web to just get into the talking points on what this really means for the Montreal Canadiens and how they can respond to it. Yesterday, you had a post made on sportsnet.ca by Eric Engels. Actually, this wasn't yesterday. This was earlier this morning, shortly after midnight. Eric Engels' post-game article, Convincing Loss to the Blues, serves as a wake-up call for the Montreal Canadiens. And what I wanted to do was just read a little bit from this piece, go over to the subreddit, read some talking points over there, because ultimately, the Habs got whooped. And we're not going to sugarcoat that. They got destroyed pretty badly. I get it, the Blues have been a really hot team as of late. The hottest team, overtaking Montreal pretty much since the Four Nations break. But if you're a Montreal Canadiens fan, if you're paying attention to yesterday's primary topic was the standings and whether or not Montreal would solidify their playoff odds even more with a win against St. Louis yesterday. Well, if you're a Montreal hater, I hate to break it to you, but not only did the Montreal Canadiens lose yesterday, but so did a whole bunch of other teams in that Eastern wildcard race. Just taking a look at it, okay, the Ottawa Senators lost in regulation to Buffalo. That's not helpful. Pittsburgh lost to Tampa. Philadelphia lost to Toronto, all in regulation. And then you also had Detroit losing to Colorado and the New York Rangers losing to the Kings. A pretty big dud of a night when you think about the Eastern wildcard race and which teams could be overtaking each other. They all lost yesterday. So nothing really changed from the front of the Canadiens and their playoff odds, thankfully. But, you know, as a Canucks fan, I'm still kind of pissed off that St. Louis took another 2 points. Okay, I should probably stop talking about that for now. This article on Eric Engels' Sportsnet page talks about how the Canadiens were down early. The shots were 11-3 for St. Louis when Jordan Kyrou put them up 1-0 in the 18th minute of the first period. And if you were thinking the Canadiens had finally woken up when Nick Suzuki scored 47 seconds later, you were mistaken. By the time the first period was through, they were down 2-1 on their way to falling to 4-1 before 30 minutes had expired, and the Canadiens didn't summon the energy or the focus they had been lacking until the game was essentially out of reach. The article talks about how this has been a pattern for the Canadiens. As of late, they have been losing a few games here and there. They lost games in overtime. They had some pretty good comeback attempts. The Colorado game comes to mind. And then it gets into some comments from people like Marty St. Louis, etc. But this is ultimately where Eric Engels dives into what needs to happen now and why this is a wake-up call for the Montreal Canadiens. This is a growth opportunity for the team, like many of the Canadiens have been presented with so far this season, and it needs to be one they pounce on quicker than the ones that have come before it. With 12 games remaining, that goal the Canadiens have been chasing all season is at least within view, and it should provide the energy and focus that would otherwise be compromised by the physical and mental tax paid to climb back into the race over these past few weeks. And then the article has some really nice comments from Nick Suzuki and St. Louis, this is what they say here at the end of the article. As Marty St. Louis said, corrections must come within games, and the Canadiens have done a much better job as of late. They weren't able to do it against the Blues, though, so you'd expect them to have a constructive talk, walk through a pointed video session, and make good use of practice time in St. Louis on Wednesday, so they don't force themselves to correct themselves in-game against the Flyers on Thursday. Down the stretch, we've had a lot of great starts, said Nick Suzuki. Now we keep getting behind, and we're not going to come back in every single game, so we've got to do a much better job of getting a lead and not being down 2 or 3 goals. That's step 1. The alarm bell should be going off now, and not 18 minutes into the next game. If you go out there and read some of the comments on the RHAB subreddit, this is where we dive into some of the other opinions from users on the site. We got lucky that no one else in our playoff race that night took points as well. Yeah, that's exactly what we had been talking about, man. Everybody lost, which is kind of miraculous when you think about it. What are the odds of that happening? If you had a money line and every team losing, how much would you have won? The Habs are finding out just how hard it is to grind out those meaningful games in March. I love Montembeault, but I really thought they were going to rest him. Every game is important, but so is rest for Monty if they want to make a serious push. Montembeault was solid in the first period and took a ton of shots and constantly active due to pressure in the D-zone. Even while well rested, that would have been a hard game to keep up, but having some rest definitely would have helped there. And I've been seeing this talking point bring itself up a lot too, whether or not Sammy Montembeault is getting played a little bit too much, whether or not Jakub Dobeš is just kind of being hung out to dry here by not getting any playing time. And there have been some critiques on Dobeš's game lately too. I think, who was it? Somebody had a take about how Dobeš really doesn't cover the top glove all too well, or top corner? Both the blocker and the glove side, something like that. I don't know. Somebody was talking about a weakness for Jakub Dobeš and whether or not that could contribute to the idea of him not playing as much lately. Who really knows? But Montembeault's been playing a lot lately. And whether or not you're of the mind that he needs to get some rest, I'll leave that up to you. You can let me know in the comment section below what do you think. But ultimately, Montembeault, he's been played a lot. We'll just say that. The Habs have now won 3 of their last 9 games. Losing 4 of those in an overtime or shootout has helped in the standings, but they'll need to start winning games again if they want to make the playoffs. We've been riding on the first line scoring at an abnormal pace since coming back from the break to still be in the bubble. I don't think the Canadiens get in for the lack of consistency from secondary scoring, plus Montembeault looks gassed. A reply here says last week, the Canadiens got some solid contributions from their secondary scoring. But I agree, they need to do it consistently down the stretch to have a chance. And ultimately, this does boil down to a few issues. You can talk about the goaltending, whether or not Montembeault's being overworked. You can talk about secondary scoring. You can talk about the abnormal scoring pace of the first line. You can talk about defensive coverage. Certainly, that is a topic that's a lot easier to let it fly under the radar just because it's not so concrete. Like with goals and assists, you can say, oh yeah, look at that, they're scoring goals and assists, or they're not scoring goals and assists. But for defensive coverage, I mean, Montembeault was getting hung out to dry. There's a reason he was making so many saves in the first period. I don't know if Montembeault getting a bunch of rest or Dobeš being in the net would have prevented that onslaught of offense from the St. Louis Blues POV. I guess the Blues are just heating up at the right time, man. Really. But ultimately, though, the Canadiens are going to need to start tightening games down at the start and not letting things get out of reach too early in order to force a comeback or to force another solid from-behind effort. Just keep things in front of them. Keep things stable. Allow themselves to be able to win these games naturally, not by forcing something by sheer power of will. But at the same time, you can open the door to some appreciation here. The Canadiens are in a playoff spot at the end of March in the 24-25 season. They have a chance to lock it down and hold on to actually make the playoffs. And then we'll make a lot of videos about that too, and it's going to be crazy. Even if the Canadiens lose in round 1, who cares? They make the playoffs. So with that in mind, I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, how this is a wake-up call for the Montreal Canadiens, this big loss against the St. Louis Blues. What are your thoughts about the game? What are your thoughts about this lesson for the Canadiens going forward? Let me know in the comments, what do you think? I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.